I was born and raised in Colerain Township, located in Cincinnati, Ohio. Despite being the oldest and largest township in the Northwest Territory, Colerain was not written extensively about, though we do have primary source documents as well as a couple of books. Local history is very important and interesting to me because I can really dig into the history of my community and it is a rich history. There are many locations and sites in Colerain that I wanted to present to you in this lecture as a virtual tour of the important locations in Colerain. We will be visiting Heritage Park, the former site of Fort Dunlap and current home of the Banning Toll Booth, Mount Rumpke, and the Beavis area. So let's get started. Heritage Park in Dunlap Station is the first stop on the virtual tour. This is the former location of Fort Colerain / Dunlap Station. These were the original settlements of Colerain. The park itself was opened to the public in 2007 and is located along the Great Miami River. The park has baseball fields, walking trails, river access, playgrounds, a frisbee golf course, and a flood marker pole that marks the historic floods of 1913 and 1959. Right next to the park is the location of the Hedges Cemetery, which was the pioneer cemetery that held the remains of many of the original settlers and veterans, the site of burials for a number of years, but most of the graves and remnants were washed away during the flood that was historic in 1913. Heritage Park is the former site of Dunlap Station, which was a settlement north of Cincinnati, Ohio. It was a military outpost and it was named after their surveyor, John Dunlap, who had been given the land by Judge Sims, who had purchased the land in 1788. In 1791, the fort came under siege by the local Confederation of Indian Tribes. Around 300 to 500 Native Americans laid siege to 30 men and women inside the fort. They were unable to overtake the fort, but that did not prevent the deaths of two of the settlers. By dawn, reinforcements had arrived from Fort Washington, but for the most part, the settlers had handled themselves well. I remember learning about that story in the third grade. It was the first time that I really became interested in history. The park is also the location of an ancient earthworks. It was a burial site nearly 2,000 years ago for the Hopewell tribes, and according to books written about Colerain Township, until the 1913 flood, the walls of the earthworks were about 9 to 12 feet above the ground. The flood changed the course of the river, and the earthworks are no longer easily visible. The floodwaters also swept away the remnants of the settlements located along the river. The Great Miami River crested at 103.1 feet during the 1913 flood, which is marked on the flood pole. The flood pole was installed a couple of years ago, and I'm told that it is the pride and joy of the members of the Colerain Historical Society who spent several years trying to raise the funds to get the marker installed. The entrance of the park is right next to the next stop on our tour, which is the Blue Rock Banning Road Toll House, which was relocated near the site of Heritage Park back in 2016-2017. The the Blue Rock Banning Road Toll House is located at the park entrance. The toll house was constructed in 1829 and served as the toll house until 1879, when it was then transformed into the Creedville Post Office and General Store. This lasted until the post office was discontinued in 1905. The sign on the outside of the toll house lists off the charges to travel down Blue Rock Road. In 1829, the charges included a penny for every head of meat cattle, 6 cents for a horse and rider, 8 cents for a sleigh or sled, 10 cents for every score of hogs or sheep, 6 cents for each additional ox, 12.5 cents for each of the following: a wagon or cart drawn by one yoke of oxen, 2 horse wagon and each additional horse, and carriages, chassis, sulky carts, or any other two-wheeled vehicles. 20 cents for coaches or four-wheeled vehicles, and finally, the cost was free for church, funeral, jurymen, electors, postmen, and army troops. Since construction in 1829, the house served as a toll house, a United States post office, a general store, a summer kitchen, and it now serves as a small museum that talks about the purposes that it served since it was built 190 years ago. For our next stop, we are going a few miles away to Beavis. Despite having a different name, Beavis is still very much a part of the Colerain area. Beavis served as a backdrop during a raid in the Civil War. The story of the darkest of all nights is the story of Morgan's raid. On the night of July the 13th, 1863, as the sun was setting, the residents of Colerain could see flames on the horizon. This was because the bridge of New Baltimore on the Great Miami River was burning. Confederate Brigadier General John Hunt Morgan had given his troops the order to keep moving east while Union troops pursued them. There is a marker on the trail that has a quote from Lieutenant Kellyan Franklin Petticord, a Confederate scout. It reads, "It was without a doubt the darkest of all nights. The troops were almost exhausted for want of sleep. Many of them, during the night, while asleep, wandered off on some of the many side roads, notwithstanding the officers' vigilance to keep all awake by riding from the head of their companies to the rear and back again, and constantly urging them, if they loved their country's cause, to keep each other awake. Oftentimes I have seen on that raid both man and horse nodding together, and at such times the horse staggering like one intoxicated." The last stop is Mount Rumpke Landfill. It is the final stop on the tour of Colerain Township. This landfill has been a part of Colerain Township for as far back as I can personally remember. And despite the ever rising peak of Mount Rumpke, it has played a very important role in the township, as well as for the tri state area. It is the sixth largest landfill in the country, as well as the largest in the state of Ohio. The landfill was founded by William F. Rumpke in the early 1930s. Rumpke ran a junkyard, as well as a coal delivery business in the city of Cincinnati. The story is that on one occasion, Rumpke was paid with 6 piglets and realized he would need to feed the pigs. He went about fixing up some of the trucks in the junkyard and then asked relatives to help him find garbage to feed the pigs, and that was how the landfill that we in Colerain know as Mount Rumpke was created. From the 1930s into the 1950s, the recycling of metal became very popular. This was due to the need for metal during World War II. In 1941, Mr. Rumpke established one of Ohio's first recycling operations. Truck drivers would drive out to collect waste, and upon their return to the facility, they would dump it into a pit. Once the trash was in the pit, it was loaded onto a conveyor belt where the Rumpke workers sorted out the different metals like tin and aluminum, which at one time sold for around $40 per ton. Other items that were sorted included the normal waste as well as rags and other items that could be reused. About 4 years after the recycling operation began, the business was growing and was in need of a new location. In 1945, Mr. Rumpke moved his entire business and his pigs to an 80-acre property in Colerain Township, where the Rumpke's first landfill site was created. In 1950, Colerain Township was still a rural area and had a population of just over 7,000 people. By 1960, the population had climbed over 28,000 with an explosive growth in only 10 years. During that 10-year period, the Rumpke family business continued to grow. In 1955, there was a law that passed that changed how businesses were run. It required that all food waste be cooked before it was fed to the livestock. At this point, the Rumpkes decided to focus on their landfill business, so they sold off the animals and focused on collection and disposal of waste and trash. By 1965, the Rumpkes business had over 2,500 customers, and they created Rumpke Container Services. In 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was created during the Nixon administration. This caused the Rumpkes to expand into engineering and environmental affairs in order to remain compliant with the new laws. This is when the Rumpke Sanitary Landfill emerged. By the 1980s, after 50 years of success, the Rumpkes began to focus on purchasing smaller companies and other local landfills. And by 1984, they had opened operations in Greenville, Ohio, and Columbus, Indiana. In 1987, they opened offices in Dayton, Ohio. In 1986, Rumpke became one of the first landfills in the United States to create a methane gas recovery program. This involved pipes to recover methane gas being released from decomposing garbage, and from there, the methane was used as natural gas for energy. There are now more than 200 gas wells within the Rumpke operation, and they recover enough gas to provide natural gas energy to 25,000 homes in the greater Cincinnati area. The operations are still continuing to this day. Thanks for joining me on my tour of Colerain Township. I hope you have enjoyed the tour and learning about the history of Colerain.